Unreal Blueprints variables. As a review, Blueprints is the visual scripting language used with Unreal. It has two main concepts: graphs, which are collections of nodes, and the nodes themselves, which are defined functionality. Nodes can be many possible different things. They could be functions, they could be events, and as we will see in this video, also variables. Scripting is created using the pins of nodes, input on the left, output on the right, and connected by wires. These are lines between the pins within the graph. When we connect the execution pin of one node to the execution pin of another, we are creating a control flow that moves from one node to the next. This allows us to create a sequence of functionality within graphs. Because Blueprints is a visual scripting language, nodes and pins, and as we will learn, variables, are all color-coded. They also use icons to differentiate their type and purpose. So we can see visually what the type of value is, looking at its color, its icon, and how we use it within the blueprint itself. So let's talk a little bit about how we add variables to blueprints. So to start, we need a blueprint. So based on an actor, we can create a subclass that gives us access to a blueprint to allows us to do visual scripting. Once we have the blueprint editor open for an existing blueprint, we can add a variable by going to the My Blueprint panel and under the Variables section, hovering our mouse over the plus symbol for plus variable. This will allow us to add new variables to the blueprint, which are only available to that blueprint. This is similar to adding variables to an existing class in a different programming language, and so the variables are part of that class and accessible to that class. So once we've added a new variable added a new variable as part of the variable section within the My Blueprint panel, by selecting that blueprint under the drop-down of variables, we can then edit its properties in the Details panel. So the process we're using where we are selecting something and moving over to the Details panel is the same recursion I mentioned in a previous video, that we navigate between the world outliner for actors and their own components. This same navigation between selecting something and going into its Details panel to change its properties. So by selecting an individual variable from the variable section under the My Blueprint panel, we can load the Details panel and change its properties. Variables have at least 3 different properties. Depending on the type of variable, it could have others. But these are its name, how it is referred to within the blueprint, its type, and remember, of course, type is also color-coded with pins and nodes. So the same color of the pins and the nodes are also the color of the type for the variable. Booleans are a certain color, integers are a certain color, etc. There's also this additional property that can be a little bit confusing in its wording. It's this Instance Editable. This means if the value is public or not. So when we initially create variables, they are private. This is similar to how we create fields or properties depending on the programming languages for classes. They are by default private. We can change that, for example, in C# by using the public keyword. This then makes it editable by other things, makes it instance editable. So carrying over that same understanding of the technical terminology, Unreal uses this property, instance editable. If it is true, then it means this variable can be edited by the Unreal editor and potentially other blueprints. It is public. So instance editable is the equivalent of public or not. Now we need one more thing here to remember. Any blueprints containing variables must be compiled before the variable can be used. And notice, in fact, under a default value, it says please compile the blueprint. So whenever we create variables, we have to compile the visual scripting language of the blueprint to be able to use that variable in other contexts. So pretty standard situation is to create a variable, compile it, and then start using that variable. And again, if we want it public, we will need to make it instance editable. So if a variable has instance editable set to true, it can be edited by the Unreal editor. So if this is true, when you select an actor who has a blueprint that has a variable, it will show up under default. So the default component under the Details panel will show the existing variables for that actor as part of its blueprint. This allows us to change the values of variables outside of the blueprint editor and allows us to, as we will see, create references to other actors or change other various values without needing to go into the blueprint to change its values. This is similar in approach to how Unity does things, in that if we use the public keyword for a field or property within C#, we can then edit those values in the inspector view in Unity. We can change the public values. This is the exact same process using Instance Editable within Unreal. If the value has Instance Editable, we can change it within the Unreal editor itself. Finally, to actually use variables for things, we need to remember that everything within blueprints are either graphs, collections of nodes, or nodes themselves. And so, variables are in fact nodes. So by creating a variable under the My Blueprint panel within the Blueprint editor, we can click and drag using the left mouse click and drag from the name of the variables under variables to the graph. And when we do that, we create a node. This node, when created within a graph, has the value of whatever that variable holds based on its type and other details. This allows us to then use the variable based on its type as input to other existing nodes by creating wires between the variable within the graph and the input pins of other nodes. We could potentially also change the value of variables as a result of different nodes by clicking the output pins from the node to the node containing the variable. So this allows us to actually use the variables. So we initially create variables under the variables section under My Blueprint using the Blueprint editor for any object or any actor, which is an object. We can then, if we want to change the name, change the type and make it Instance Editable. Instance Editable, while slightly confusing wording, just means is this public or not. If it's public, it can be edited by the Unreal editor or potentially other blueprints as well. So it's just a public value. If it's not Instance Editable, it is private to that blueprint. The variable can be used, it just can't be accessed anywhere else. Finally, we can use the variable by clicking and dragging it out of the variable section and onto a graph, which allows us to create a node and use that value. Having said all this, let's move over to Unreal to see these concepts in action. So I have Unreal pulled up here, and I have added an actor of a cube over here, dragged a cube right over here and dropped it right here. I have gone ahead and created a blueprint actor subclass of this cube. It's saved down here as cube blueprint. So I'm going to go ahead and open the blueprint editor for this cube. I have it selected over here in World Outliner, down here, Edit Blueprint, Open Blueprint Editor. So I have the blueprint editor for the blueprint of the cube. So as was mentioned, we can create new variables by going to the variables section of the My Blueprint panel. My blueprint for me is over here on my left. So I've opened up the blueprint, and then over here on the left is My Blueprint. And then it holds various things, graphs as covered in a previous video, functions as will be covered in a future video, macros, future video, and for this, variables. So right over here, and a hover right over the plus symbol for plus variable. Then we see immediately it gives us a name under variables, and then also way over here on my right, under the details panel, gives us the details about the variable. So we have its name, its type, and Instance Editable, as well as other potential things we could change. So I am going to change this to message. Now I'm going to deselect it for a moment, reselect it to make sure we have access to it over here in the details panel. Over here in the details panel, I'm going to keep the name message. I like that name, but I'm going to change its variable type to a string. So using this dropdown, I have a number of possible built-in data types I could choose, and these are all right here, as well as different structures I might use based on various settings and other values that exist within Unreal. Potentially interfaces I could use, a large number of things as well. The object types for all existing actors and types of actors. Notice things like AI task and other things are special types of actors, so special classes it could potentially be based on their object type. There are a large number of those. And then finally, we have a number of other built-in values within Unreal. So I mentioned I want to use a string. So on this list right here, I could search for it if I want, or just click right here for string. Notice the color changed over here, string with a kind of a pink color. Also changed over here for message as well. So notice right here, please compile the blueprint. So we've created a variable, but in order to use it, we have to compile. Again, it is a visual scripting language, the middle emphasis of the 3 words. So let's compile. And then now we have access to that variable. So if I want, I could click and drag this variable onto this graph, but I want to note something before I do that. So notice over here, Instance Editable, and I'll put the little tooltip here, whether this variable is publicly editable on instances of this blueprint, which is a fancy way of saying, is this public or not? So if I click this right here, something else changes at the same time, and it's slightly hard to see unless you know what you're looking for. So I've changed it, so I do have to recompile, but this icon right here has changed. Right next to here, it says has a little eyeball now, and it says variable is public and is editable on each instance of this blueprint, which is to say it is editable within the Unreal Editor and potentially any uses of other blueprints who have access to this actor. So it's public. So I need to recompile. Okay, let's minimize this temporarily. Now I have Cube Blueprint selected within the World Outliner. Coming down here to the Details panel, looking through its components, I see the addition of a new component called Default. Default is the default values for any corresponding variables that are part of blueprints that are part of the actor. And what do I see? Message. Message is a variable we see, and I could potentially give this a value if I wanted to. So again, Instance Editable just means public or not. And if it's public, it means we can change it within the Unreal Editor. But I want to go back to the blueprint here for just a second because I want to use this finally. So let's go back to Blueprint Editor. Okay. So I want to actually use this value. Now, it's okay that it's public, Instance Editable right now. I'm going to click and drag it under the Variables section of my Blueprint panel, right into my graph, and let it go. Boom. So now it says, hey, do you want to get the message or set message? This corresponding to what action we want to take with its value. Do we want to get the value or set the value? I just temporarily want to get the value. And now we have message, which notice the color corresponds to the color. It's a string, so all of this is color coded across the board. Okay, so I want to actually use this for something. So I'm going to return to our old friend print string. But to do that, I need to have the execution pins of one or more nodes connected because I can't execute anything with this value right here. It's just the value. So read the value of the variable message. It doesn't do anything for us. I'm just going to use event begin play. So clicking the execution pin right here out to somewhere on the graph, letting it go. I'm going to type print, find our old friend print string, and move this over here. So again, everything is color coded. It is a visual scripting language. So we have event begin play, which is in red. This is a function, kind of a light blue, called print string. So on pins, all of the inputs are on the left, all of the outputs are on the right. So I want to input a new string value as part of this function. So right here it has a pin called endString, which, by the way, matches the color. So all this, again, is color-coded. So if I connect the wires between the output pin of message, again, it's on the right-hand side, to the input pin of print string, which is on the left-hand side, I supply the value. So this new combination of nodes says when the event begin play happens, transfer execution from this node to another node, print string. As part of its input, take whatever the value is, get the value of message, and use it as part of this node right here. So if I compile this, we could potentially use it. However, message doesn't have a value. So now I have two potential options. I can either change the value right here, the default value, within the blueprint editor, or potentially I could change the public value, which are linked together because it is instance editable. which is to say I can change the value right here, or I could go to the Unreal editor and change it as well. But I'm just going to change it right here. And I have hello there. And I'm going to go ahead and compile. Okay, so I have hello there as the default value for message. And when event begin play happens, it should transfer execution between event begin play and print string. So let's go ahead and minimize the Blueprint editor, come back here, and we should see there it is, hello there, right there, and then it disappeared about 2 seconds later. So everything worked exactly as we told it to. Notice, by the way, when I changed the value of the variable message inside the Blueprint editor, it changed it over here as well. Because these are the same, right? This is the public value of this. So it's available right here within the Unreal editor. So again, as a review, we can create variables by creating a blueprint first, because we're using blueprints, which is the visual scripting language. We can also then, under the My Blueprint panel, create new variables right here by hovering over the plus symbol, creating new variables. Each variable has at least the properties of name, type, and instance editable. The name is what it goes by within the blueprint. The type is whatever data type we want to use. There are a large variety of potential data types we could use within Unreal. And then instance editable is whether or not it is public. That is, can other things access this variable or not? If it is instance editable, the Unreal Engine or the Unreal Editor, the Unreal Engine can access it, but the Unreal Editor can access it, as well as potentially other blueprints. If it's not instance editable, none of them can. It is private to that blueprint. We can also set default values right here, as I have done. And when we click and drag the variables from under variables to the graph, it becomes a node and is of course color-coded based on its value, its type right here, in this case string, and we can use that to potentially feed into or out of any other nodes, depending if we want to get, retrieve the value, or set to update the value based on whatever we're doing within that graph.